Dear students, Professor Pontificate here. I have a confession to make. In my last lecture on the canonical story format, I went off on a bit of a tirade on the difference between approaching film through instrumental interest versus my own, obviously superior, cognitive approach. In my fervor, I neglected to mention a couple of other important elements regarding plot. The first of which is flashback. Flashbacks are one common technique filmmakers use. Flashbacks interrupt the chronological flow of events to go back in time. Now, typically, flashbacks are psychologically motivated and used to cue the viewer for information that will prove vital to the advancement of the plot or the development of the character. Flash-forwards move forward in time rather than backwards, and because they cannot be psychologically motivated, except perhaps in the case of a psychic who can see the future, they are virtually non-existent in classical Hollywood cinema. Now, flash-forwards can be accounted for according to artistic motivation. Remember our four motivations, the fourth of which was artistic, which is why flash-forwards are more commonly found in films from the tradition of the European art cinema. Redundancy is another important element in the construction of Hollywood plot. Because film is intended to be viewed continuously, the viewer held captive in a darkened theater without the ability to pause or rewind the film to catch vital information that he or she may have missed while momentarily distracted. Conventional plot tends to be highly redundant. For example, in scene 1, we might see a character discussing on the phone the possibility of having lunch with a friend. Scene 2 might show those two at lunch, and then in scene 3, that character might discuss with the third character having already just had lunch with that friend. What we have are 3 scenes juxtaposed, all reinforcing, repeating information, so that it's painfully clear what's salient for the construction of a successful fabula. Now, other basic narrational terms of vague definition are protagonist, which is defined as the main character of the story. The antagonist, by contrast, is the character or characters who are in conflict with that protagonist. Now, students often say the protagonist is the good guy, the antagonist is the bad guy, but this is not the case. Please note that categorizing the protagonist and the antagonist have nothing whatsoever to do with their moral capacity or their qualities as human beings. They are simply called the main characters and the characters who are in conflict with the main characters. You have anti-hero protagonists, for example, Bonnie and Clyde. Characters who are murderers and thieves. They defy conventional, lawful, and moral behavior. However, they are the main characters of the story. By contrast, the law is seen as the antagonist. Characters, both protagonists and antagonists alike, may be either dynamic or static. Now, a dynamic character is a character who undergoes a change throughout the story. So they begin the film one way, and by the end, because of a series of events, they have changed. Now, this could be a change for the better. Perhaps they have had an epiphany, they've had a realization or some insight into their life, and they're going to make a change for the good. Now, this can work conversely as well. Could work out for the bad. So, because of a series of traumatic events, a character's life might be unraveling, they might be having an emotional or a mental breakdown. But either way, they start the film one way, and by the time they end the film, things have changed. They're dynamic. A static character, on the other hand, is a character who does not undergo any sort of change. So they start the film one way, and by the time we get to the end of the film, they are the exact same. They're static. Another narrational term we need to define is motif. A motif is a repetition of something. It could be a word, image, color, phrase. It could be an object, music, etc. It could be anything. But it gains some sort of significance by the end of the film. Now, by significance, we typically mean that the film, that the motif can be related to something symbolically. So it could be related to the theme of the film, to the development of a character, or the creation of the film's mood or atmosphere or its tone. Because certainly any film, there are going to be a host of words, images, objects that are repeated throughout, but by the end of the film accrue no sort of significant meaning by which we can append it to some other larger thing in the film. So it's important to note that, as Dr. Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Now let's consider an example, the 1967 film The Graduate. Dustin Hoffman plays a character, Ben Braddock. He's a recent college graduate who's returned to his parents' home for the summer. Now, Ben is ambivalent towards his future. Should he get a job? Should he go to graduate school? Or maybe he should do neither. He's a fairly unmotivated character at this point in his life. A motif in the film is Ben's parents' pool. Now, through the film, we see repeated shots of Ben lounging around the pool. He's swimming in the pool. At times, he's floating aimlessly in the pool. He's sort of listlessly floating by or reclining poolside. Now, this motif becomes symbolic of Ben and his development as a character, because Ben is not only floating in the pool, but he's also floating aimlessly through his own life. And this is further reinforced through the editing by juxtaposing images of Ben lounging in the pool with images of Ben lying around in a hotel room while he carries on an affair with his dad's business partner's wife, the original cougar, Mrs. Robinson. In one scene, Ben's dad confronts him while Ben is on a floating device in the pool, and his dad says, "Ben, what are you doing? Isn't it time you got off your ass and got a job?" Now, motifs can be symbolic, and this is a symbol that stands for something outside of itself, outside of its immediate context. So in this example, in The Graduate, on one level, sure, the pool is a pool, right? It's a pit that's filled with water, and it's intended for recreation. However, through repetition, repeated images of Ben in the pool, juxtaposed with images of Ben carrying on an affair, lounging around through a hotel, as well as his life, it becomes a motif that symbolizes Ben and his attitude towards life in general. This is the nature of symbolism. It's no longer simply a pool in the denotative or functional sense, but it's something that means something outside of that sense, something larger than the immediate context. It's a reflection of Ben and his character. Symbols can also relate to social or cultural images that exist in the world at large. Take, for example, science fiction films in the 1950s. Now, nearly every science fiction film in the 1950s is going to mention something about radiation. It could be a passing comment, or it may be the crux of the entire narrative. But if you pay close enough attention, you're bound to find some reference to radiation. Now, these references are symbolic of the age of anxiety, the very pertinent cultural fear of atomic warfare. In the wake of World War II, society was set on edge, fearing for the first time in human history that humanity at any point could be completely wiped out of existence, not by a cataclysmic natural disaster, but rather as a consequence of humanity itself, the apocalyptic result of our terrible weaponry. So in this sense, radiation may have some narrative purpose situated within the film, but simultaneously it's symbolic of a larger cultural issue. Our last narrational term that begs defining is theme, which can be defined as the film's meaning expressed as an abstraction. Other elements of film, such as character, plot, setting, these all exist right on the surface of the film. But the theme, on the other hand, looks deeper to suggest what those things might mean. Why do we have characters that act in such a way? What does it add up to? What's the grand meaning behind it all? When you start to answer questions like that, you're approaching the film's theme. Now, Hollywood is notorious for having fairly simple themes, ones that reaffirm generic social values, like good triumphs over evil, crime does not pay, true love overcomes all obstacles, appreciate the little things in life, etc. While in general that axiom holds true, it's also the case that through an ideological reading of the film, one may be able to see deeper or more subversive things at work. Take, for example, James Whale's film, the original 1931 adaptation of the classic novel Frankenstein. One could easily say that the film's theme is to keep scientific experimentation in check. Do not lose your humanity in the name of progressive science. Such an interpretation would not be without merit. However, considering the film from an ideological point of view may offer another perspective on the film. In the film, Dr. Frankenstein's main goal, we learn, is to try to create human life with his own two hands, as he says. In order to accomplish his goal, Dr. Frankenstein commences clandestine experiments in his secret and secluded laboratory set up in an abandoned building. Frankenstein gives himself night and day to his experiments, to the effect that he is neglectful of his eager fiancée. Furthermore, we learn that Dr. Frankenstein's father is anxious for his son to marry and give him a grandson. This is a key development in the film's central plot, because Dr. Frankenstein is trying to create life outside of socially sanctioned institutions and means, whereas, by contrast, his father and fiancée want him to create life through first, the socially sanctioned institution of marriage, and secondly, through the good old-fashioned way, i.e., heterosexual coupling. Now, in this sense, Dr. Frankenstein's monster becomes what film theorists call a queer figure, because the monster interrupts the conventional heterosexual relationship. Now, please note that queer in this context is not used as a pejorative, but rather it's the adopted term that theorists use. Incidentally, it is on the day of Dr. Frankenstein's wedding that the monster escapes, and literally breaks into Frankenstein's house, attacks his bride, and, needless to say, puts a kink on the honeymoon. It's not until after the monster, the queer figure, has been eliminated that Dr. Frankenstein is able to consummate his marriage. Now, given the symbolic nature of the monster as a queer figure, and Frankenstein's insistence on creating life with his own two hands rather than with his beautiful bride, it's possible to suggest that Frankenstein is gay. Of course, in Hollywood in the 1930s, one could not depict gay characters ostensibly, but such representations had to be shifted to the level of subtext, to the symbolic. And it's precisely what an ideological reading of the film will lay bare, that which the film attempts to repress, consciously or not. The theme of Frankenstein viewed through this lens could be expressed thusly. Rigid social systems that sanction only heterosexual coupling create mad scientists of gay people. As additional support for such a reading, it may interest you that James Whales, the director of the film, was gay. Now, if you'll permit me the indulgence, captive students, I will say that such a reading is not merely sophisticated, but also astute. You will greatly impress your instructor should you proffer such interpretations. And so this is Professor Pontificate signing off for now. Should your dear instructor, Mr. Alrahaski, have need of me again, I will do my best to make myself at his disposal, but for now I'm off to the life of the mind.